Hello creative cooks, welcome back to another episode of the Creative Phebe Cooks channel. I'm your host Phoebean, and today I'm adding one more dish to the Gambian recipe series, and that is okra soup, also known as Superkanja in the Gambia. One of my favorite dishes to make to feast on since childhood. Like the previous Gambian recipes I've shared, this okra soup recipe will be made with a plant-based approach and without palm oil. So if that's something that you're looking forward to, let's begin. Now in my last episode featuring 3 high protein meals for the week, I prepared and sliced up the okra to get a quick start for today's recipe. Wash the okra in plenty of water with a splash of vinegar and about a tablespoon or 2 of baking soda, depending on how much okra you're preparing. Let the okra soak for about 5 to 10 minutes so they get pretty clean before continuing on to the next step. After soaking the okra, drain them, cut off the tops of the okra, set those aside, and slice each piece of okra, whether singly or in bunches, into very nice slices. Or you may roughly chop the okra in batches at a time by using a food processor. I prefer to slice it because I want to control the size of the okra pieces before they go into the soup. However, if you want your soup to be a lot more slimy, grinding a bit of the okra in the food processor before adding it to the soup will help you achieve that nice slimy texture. After slicing the okra, store it in a large Ziploc bag or multiple Ziploc bags, freezer bags, whichever one you have available, depending on how much okra you prepared. And keep this in the freezer. That way they can stay fresh for a longer period at a time. And they can be stored up to 2 to 3 months, especially if you like to cook your meals in large batches. Label the bag so you know what's in it and give it a date so you know when it went in the freezer. Now, since I'm not adding any fish or meat to the okra soup, here I have some green lentils to add a good amount of protein to this soup to make it balanced and nourishing. Sort through the green lentils to remove any stony materials, then give the lentils a good rinse about twice with fresh water. And after washing the lentils, soak them in lots of fresh water and let this sit overnight or for about 20 to 30 minutes before you start cooking. And this will give the lentils some time to soften so they're able to cook all the way through in a shorter amount of time when it's time to cook them. Next, I'm going to measure out some locust paste, also known as netatu in the Gambia. This is a very common ingredient in a few Gambian recipes. Netatu is made out of a fermented locust bean. Because it is fermented, it has a very strong aroma. It might actually come off as very off-putting depending on who's smelling it, but it will definitely add a flavorful component depending on what dish you are adding it to. I'll add some more information on that in the description box below. If you do not have access to this product, you can leave it out. But if you really want the full experience, I will highly suggest that you look for this ingredient at an African store, which is where you will most probably find it, or you can give it a try by finding it on Etsy. Next, I have here some onions, mushrooms, and habaneros. If you know me already, you know I cannot live without habaneros. This combination is going to give the okra soup a really good flavor since there is no fish or meat in this dish, which would normally contribute to the unique flavoring properties of this soup compared to other African soups. After all that chopping and dicing, add the chopped onions, mushrooms, and 2 habanero peppers to a food processor. If you feel like that's too much habanero peppers, feel free to start with 1, then you can build up from there. Grind this mix together on high speed until the combination is well crushed or turns to paste. The mushrooms lend a super satiating and an ultra complex flavor combination that will make this plant-based okra soup taste like the original recipe. For some reason, it tastes very much like the original, but let's continue cooking. I'll let you be the judge of that. Now that all the prep work is done, to a large cooking pot on high heat, add in some olive oil. You can skip this if you prefer, and that would make the okra soup completely oil free. Since I'm not using palm oil, I'm adding in olive oil instead. Next, I'm going to add in that paste that I made in the food processor together with the locust bean paste. Stir this combination together really well and let it saute for about 7 minutes so that the aroma will intensify. But you do not want this combination to burn, so I'd say keep an eye on it as it does its thing. After the sauteing process, add in a fresh bunch of oregano, both the leaves and the stems, which will give this okra soup a really good aroma, together with all the other flavoring components. Season the contents with coarse sea salt, then stir well to prevent the contents from sticking to the bottom of the pot, and continue sauteing for another 4 to 5 minutes to gently release the fragrance and the aroma from the oregano. Now while that's happening, give the food processor a good rinse with some water so nothing goes to waste, and pour that water into the cooking pot together with the remaining amount of water needed for the recipe. Stir the contents well again and cover the pot slightly to prevent the contents from overflowing while they bubble for 14 to 15 minutes. Since you've already cut up your okra ahead of time and everything's looking fine and ready to go, add in the frozen sliced okra to the pot, stir it up, and bring the contents to a boil for about 7 minutes to cook the okra through. Even though raw okra is edible, but since this is okra soup, you want that okra to cook really well so it doesn't taste as perky, as fresh, or as fibrous as it would taste in its raw state. Alright, so if you're still watching this video, that tells me that you're loving it, and that also makes me really glad. So be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up so YouTube gets to recommend it to other creative cooks like you. And do me a favor by sharing this recipe with a loved one who is looking to make more plant-based and Gambian recipes like this hot pot of okra soup. Thank you very much. After draining the lentils, set it aside, and at this point you want to add some baking soda or potash to the soup. This will help the soup to slime well. In my language, you say you want to make it draw. So you want it to slime really well with a good consistency. Now, using a baking soda is not a make or break, but it really does help since you're adding okra to this soup, and this is okra soup. It also helps to reduce the acidity of the lentils while softening them as they cook through. So in this case, you get a double benefit when adding in the baking soda or the potash to this recipe. But keep an eye on this pot because you gotta stir the contents really well after adding in the baking soda or the potash so that the contents do not overflow, because this ingredient has a tendency to cause the boiling contents to overflow well past the brim of the pot. So make sure your cooking pot is large enough and deep enough to be able to accommodate for this phenomena. Alright, after all that bubbling has cooled down a bit, gently pour in the drained lentils and reduce the heat to medium so the lentils get a chance to cook for about 15 to 20 minutes or until your lentils are well cooked through. Now I'm using green lentils here, not red lentils, because when red lentils cook through they tend to get mushy, which will make the texture quality of this okra soup really imbalanced in my opinion. However, for green lentils, they do hold their shape pretty well all throughout the cooking process and even after the cooking process when you're warming it up to eat during the week. Now also, if you do eat fish, this would be the perfect time when you add it to the soup instead of the lentils. And if you eat meat like beef, which would be the most appropriate for this recipe, you would have had to add it almost at the very beginning of cooking this recipe so that the beef gets a chance to cook all the way through by the time this recipe is considered done. I want this soup to taste like it has fish in it because, quite frankly, that's how I grew up eating it, and it tastes absolutely fabulous. So for all my plant-based creative cooks here that want that fish flavor without the fish, add in 2 sheets of nori. That's right, 2 sheets of nori. Cut the sheets up into very small pieces to your liking and add it to your cooking pot. Stir in the nori pieces into the pot really well because they tend to cling to each other after they're in the pot due to the steam and the heat that causes that to happen. And cook the soup for another minute or so until the nori sheets get a chance to infuse their fishy flavor into the okra soup. Towards the end of the cooking, add in 3 to 4 whole habanero peppers into the soup. Now these peppers will lend a burst of aroma to the soup instead of releasing spice. If you want more spice to your soup, feel free to crush 1 or 2 of the habanero peppers like I'm doing in this case, and it will give you a whole lot of spice. But be careful with this step, especially if you've never made okra soup before or your spice tolerance might be a bit low, because too much spice can make the soup overpowering, which will also make the soup inedible, and that's not cool. There you have it, creative cooks. Plant-based okra soup, also known as Superkanja. Alright, so I cannot wait for you to try this one and share it with all your loved ones. I'm serving mine with boiled plantains because my fufu turned out a blob, which means I need to learn how to make better fufu. In that case, let me know in the comment section how you made this recipe, who you shared it with, what you ate it with, all the details. Thank you so much for watching. We will chat again in my next episode, and happy cooking!